Here at the Black Information Network, we know how important it is for you to start your week off energized, engaged, and enlightened. There are always major stories that break over the weekend, and we feel you should know about the ones we are talking about today. So stay tuned for our weekend recap, featuring Black Information Network news anchor, Katie Gray. This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. All right, Katie Gray, welcome back to the show. I am pleasantly surprised by the rapid turnaround. How have you been in the short amount of absence that we've experienced from each other?
Oh my goodness. I've been doing really well. Honestly,
Good.
I was so excited that I, have a chance to sit back down with you so soon. And it looks like one of the stories too is kind of a follow-up from one of the other stories we talked about. So
Exactly.
it was clearly need to be,
So why don't we start right there? This is the story we talked about last time. This from the Black Information Network, a follow-up. American Airlines CEO Robert Isom is speaking out after a discrimination lawsuit alleged that 8 Black passengers were kicked off a flight over a complaint about body odor. In a letter sent on Tuesday, June 18th, Isom called the January incident, quote, unacceptable, this per CBS News. Quote, I am incredibly disappointed by what happened on that flight and the breakdown of our procedures, the CEO said. He goes on to say, we fell short of our commitments and failed our customers in this incident. He then says the company would focus on improving the travel experience for Black customers. He also thanked the NAACP president, Derek Johnson, for expressing concern over the incident. Quote, representatives of American told them that they were removed from the flight because of a complaint about a Black male passenger who allegedly had offensive body odor. This according to the lawsuit. The 8 men weren't seated together and didn't know each other. According to the lawsuit, the men didn't have any offensive body odor, and at no time did anyone ever specifically accuse any of them of having offensive body odor. So again, this was the story that you and I initially broke on the Black Information Network. What are your thoughts to the follow-up and the response to the CEO?
I have to say, I'm actually impressed that they really tried to handle it in their own way as timely as possible. I mean, obviously, as we mentioned before when we had chatted on the story, it is something to be said about, wanting to investigate what happened, really question, obviously, the judgment of how the case was handled. But I do think that there is something to be said about accountability, about them wanting to do something about it, investigate, obviously everything that, how it aspired. And then recognizing that I think at the end of the article, it also mentioned that everyone on that team, or that the employees the staff that was involved directly were suspended while they're doing some type of investigation.
Sure.
So it does kind of, to me, speak to the volume of them wanting to learn from this situation and wanting to put practices going forward to make sure that this doesn't happen, because as we mentioned, everything about it, there just seemed to have been so many things that fell through the cracks that seemed very suspicious. They were sitting at different places on the plane. They didn't know each other. Then there was this back and forth of having them all get off the plane and then have to reboard, but then trying to find them another flight. Like everything about it was kind of, the ball was fumbled,
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. To be honest, there's not much else that a company can do, not much else that a CEO can do, except for kind of lean into it, take it on the chin, respect the process of, okay, these folks are going to file a lawsuit. We're not going to file countersuit. We're not going to, this is something that we need to learn from. Normally when there's a lawsuit involved, people try to distance themselves, from the lawsuit, no comment, or lawyers are investigating, that sort of thing. And this gentleman, he's working with the NAACPs. Well, maybe not working with, but he's accepting input from the NAACP, which, if I'm not mistaken, was the first, major civil rights organization to respond to, this accusation against these gentlemen and the 3 gentlemen's lawsuit. And so, again, embracing the teachable moment. I think that they even are framing this teachable moment as an example for other companies that might find themselves in the similar predicament to learn from their process. In other words, they are intending to bear the full weight of this moment, to learn from it. If it ends up being the case, they will settle the lawsuit. And their actions suggest that they don't want a repeat of this, nor do they want any of this toxicity in their corporate culture. And so they are stepping up and saying, okay, we'll be the example that other folks can learn from. This is not what we represent, and we will show and prove it. And so that's the best that you can do. So for folks who still want to be mad, I get it, because we have a tendency as a society to kind of develop a sort of mob mentality, but break out the pitchforks and the torches and want to burn everything to the ground. And to be honest, I'm not mad at that all the time. But when a person is doing their best to make good, we also have to respect that. And sometimes the make good is only what people can do. People can't rewind time. They can't undo the past, and so if a person says, I'm sorry, this is a teachable moment, I'll be an example. I'm going to lean into this. I'll respect the process, whatever comes of it, and we'll go from there, hopefully. I still want to continue to operate in this business space. So if you'll still have me, then I will learn from this. You deserve better. I'll be better. That's the best anybody can hope for. And I maintain that all of us, human beings endowed with consciousness from our common creator, whoever you decide that is, all of us are imperfect beings on a journey toward perfection, right? None of us are perfect, and therefore we should be entitled just a modicum of grace for growth, for learning, for developing. And I think that extends at least to the people behind companies. Companies can have a long-standing culture, but if individuals themselves say, hey, look, I'm trying to right this personal ship. I inhabit this body. I'm one singular unit of consciousness, and I would like to do better. I think that in those instances, we can even go further. So, food for thought. But obviously, the story is a big story around here. So we'll continue to stay on top of it. Let's move on. Next up, from 8newsnow.com, the man accused of orchestrating the murder of rap icon Tupac Shakur has secured money to post his $750,000 bail, which could put him on house arrest pending trial. The 8 News Now investigators have learned. Las Vegas Metro Police arrested Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, age 61, on Friday, September 29, 2023, near his Henderson home, the day before a grand jury indicted him on charges of murder with a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement. Davis has remained incarcerated at the Clark County Detention Center since his arrest. When setting bail, Clark County District Court Judge Carly Kearney said should Davis come up with the money, she would need to hear where it came from before releasing him. A company called eBail was securing the bond, records said. In Nevada, a defendant must post 15% of one's bail, with a bail bonds company posting the rest. 15% of Davis's bail amounts to $112,000. So this is another follow-up story, one that just kind of spanned a little bit longer length of time. And of course, this is probably the most iconic hip-hop name ever, Tupac Shakur. And then there's a gentleman behind the murder now. They finally made an arrest. So obviously folks are talking about this. Let's get your thoughts here.
There's, as you mentioned, there's so much to unpack. There's been so many pop culture references and so many aspects of, speculation over the years of what happened and who shot him. Right.
Yeah.
So it's insane to me over the fact that they have finally made an arrest. And I have to say, even reading into the details of, hopefully not jumping off topic, anything to do with the case. On one level, I'm glad that, personally, that there isn't a statute of limitation on murder.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting when we're talking about a case from 96 and trying to find substantial evidence. And, in that time period, we don't really have any surveillance and videos and things that we would rely on heavily now.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Well,
there's so many aspects about this case.
Yeah. I think that so one of the funny things about this, because, I've worked in hip hop radio for a long time. I got into radio in 2005. So this would have been 9 years after Tupac's death. And in that time, I saw the rise of social media, because when I first got in the radio, MySpace was first starting to become a thing. And so I saw that whole wave, and then obviously up to now. And there have been these little bits and pieces here and there from the internet that grew, lived a full life, and then died. And a lot of them were interview platforms and kind of like the precursors to like podcasts and things that we see today. And during that time, this gentleman, Keefe D, has popped up a number of times. And, you know, he's told this story a number of times. He's told this story, I believe, on Vlad TV years ago. And so the way he tells the story, if I'm not mistaken, because, you know, I haven't watched his years old interview in some years, but
don't quote you. Okay.
Yeah. So don't quote me on it. Yeah. Thank you. But the way he tells the story is that he was just kind of in the car. Like some people like tapped him on the shoulder and was like, hey, we got to go, blah, 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 whoop de whoop. And he's like, all right, let's get it, you know, because that's how you do in gang culture. Right. And, you know, so he's along for the ride, but really I believe it might have been his nephew, Orlando, that was doing the shooting. And Orlando later ended up dying. So in his estimation, he was close enough to witness it. He himself did not.
So in legal terms, he would be an accessory.
Right. But
said, I guess, or indicated in records or interviews that you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is my understanding. Again, there are people who are more intimately connected to this, who might have followed this story, that can correct us in the comments or however you want. But I feel like this is approximately the story that he shared over the years. And he does his best to keep the things off the record, and the things on the record. But I think, you know, in doing so and being really selective with his implication, he sort of implies the story that he wants us all to take from it, which is kind of what I feel like I have here. You know, my memory might be a bit distorted again, but I feel like this is kind of what he wanted us to take away from the story. So, so there are a lot of us who felt like, okay, the gentleman that actually murdered Tupac, he's dead. He's gone. So there is closure there to a degree. I recall Tupac's mom even saying, you know, I believe the gentleman that murdered my son is now deceased, and, you know, there's nothing else to see here. So now that there's this arrest all these years later, for folks that maybe weren't as involved with, you know, I'm from California. I'm from Compton. So like gangs have been a part of my life since I was very little. Not like growing up with gangs, but, you know, because I moved to Phoenix when I was very young, but being aware of gangs and gang culture and how it moves. And so there are things about that pique my interest from time to time, I suppose. You know, I worry, my heart breaks for gang members because I kind of know what it's like to be in that space from age 4 or 5 up to about age 7 when I got out of there. Right. So again, following this story, you know, from the distance that I followed, I don't want to pretend like I was, you know, turning pages or anything like that. But I was just kind of genuinely curious of how things were shaping up. And, you know, the life of a gang member is kind of like the life of all the guys involved here, you know. And so the Keefe D one, for me personally, doesn't bring any real closure to the story. It's just, you know, kind of an accomplice, a person who was like responding to, hey, these guys are going to go do this. We need your help. And that's just kind of how gang life works. So I don't feel bad for him. You know, it's like if he goes to prison, then he goes to prison. That's cool. But it doesn't bring any additional. It's not like, wow, we finally got Tupac's murderer, because my understanding is that Tupac's murderer has been deceased. But for those who weren't, again, as close to the story, it might feel like there's some closure here with Keefe D kind of on the hook for it. And they might feel a little like disappointed that he was able to secure such a high dollar amount for bail. And, you know, this is what the courts decided, that was the flight risk that he was worth. And you know, we'll see what happens at trial. But for now, that's the story.
Join us for the National Urban League Conference in New Orleans, July 24th through the 27th at Hyatt Regency, New Orleans. Don't miss out. Register today at nulconference.org.
This is your weekend recap featuring today's guest, Black Information Network news anchor, Katie Gray. All right, next up from the Black Information Network, video appears to suggest that a Blacks for Trump event in Detroit was attended by mostly white people. I don't know if you saw this, but this was really funny. All right. On Saturday, June 15th, former President Donald Trump appeared at 2 campaign events in Detroit ahead of the 2024 election. The former president appeared to garner a warm reception during his campaign stop at the Turning Point Action Conference in downtown Detroit. However, at a second event touted as a Blacks for Trump rally, only a few Black people were seen in videos that circulated on social media. The rally was held at 180 Church, a Black church in Detroit, but the crowd appeared to be filled with white people. So this one, I'm only going to say one thing, because I already talked about this, but I haven't got your thoughts. Chris hasn't got your thoughts, so this is kind of why this is here. The one thing I will say is it just turns my stomach whenever I see Blacks for Trump. It feels culturally insensitive. Maybe if they went the extra mile and called it African Americans for Trump, which, normally I don't make a distinction because I'm Black. I would tell people I'm Black. But somehow when I see it in that phrase, it just irks my soul. Like Kendrick when he was saying, we don't want to hear you say N-word no more. When you're saying that to Drake, just some stuff's just cringeworthy. This is cringeworthy to me. Outside of that, I've had this conversation. I would love to get your thoughts here. This crowd of really, it was pretty much all white folks at a Blacks for Trump rally at a Black church. So how'd that hit you?
Well, first of all, I find it very interesting that you struggled with that title quite a bit. Okay.
Yeah, always have.
You were getting choked up as you were trying to get it all the way out. And that's the first time I've seen that happen to you. So very fascinating. So I of course read the article and I was trying to pull up different videos. Even the angles of the video was kind of difficult to kind of perceive, if that makes sense. But then I think you're right. There's a twofold of it, which is I don't even really like the way that anytime it's like framed a certain way, like as a reporter and as a journalist, again, the grained in journalist in me wants to say, show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me, oh, this is a Black rally. Just show me. And why do we need to make a distinction? Yeah. Unless you're literally trying to cater and frame something a specific way on, gaining a specific, idea that you're pushing. It was interesting to me because you're right. Like the title indicates that like there was like one or two. I definitely in the video, you can see a couple of I saw more than 3 Black people. Yeah. But I can definitely say, even though a lot of it's from the back, like the videos, not from the front side. So it's kind of hard if like people are wearing hats or hoodies, like you can't see get an idea on if it's Black or white or anybody else. But I do agree with you. I would say if nothing else, the title and the way that it's framed is very, very misleading. Yeah. Because even if I'm being generous and let's say it's half and half, let's say it's half Black and half white, that's still not the way that they're framing this event to have taken place, right? Yeah. Like if I was reporting an event and I was like, oh, there's huge crowds downtown, and then you showed up and there's 10 people, well, then you're like, well, wait a minute, what kind of crowd is this? Yeah.
This is an outing. This isn't a huge crowd. Yeah, this is
like there was one person with a picket sign. That is not a protest, not it's disrupting traffic is the one person, Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm multiple levels. I just think it's irresponsible. Anything when it comes to misleading, framing that way,
Sure. And I want people to go check this story out on the Black Information Network. Check out BINnews.com. You'll find the article. Because I believe there was a link, or still is a link to this actual video. And you can see, so basically on the stage, again, it's touted as a Blacks for Trump rally. But on the stage, there's some Black people and Donald Trump's there. It's a church. So there are folks that are standing. I think there's, like you mentioned, like 3 or 4. And then the camera pans from the stage to face the crowd. And when it pans across the crowd, you might be right. There's probably 2 or 3 more Black people in the crowd. I know I saw one black person in the crowd because I was going frame by frame trying to find any black people. I was like, there was no black people. And then I found one. I'm like, okay, then this gentleman at least is a black person in the crowd. But, you know, I might have missed a couple others. But everyone else was white there. And it was that pan that really was the smoking gun, because on the stage you see Donald Trump and, you know, there's, you know, a few folks up there, but, you know, a number of black people, and they looked like they were the ones engaging. And then the crowd that showed up was just not black people. So, you know, it's interesting how Donald Trump is using these cities with a significant black population, and using the optics around certain events, as you mentioned, a Blacks for Trump rally, to suggest that he is a candidate that is for black people. And then when you look at kind of the data suggesting that black men in particular are somewhat starting to consider voting for him, the numbers aren't as alarming as the headlines make it seem. But I would imagine that some of that is based in truth, that there are a handful of black folks that are, you know, considering a vote for Donald Trump. He's leaning into that, using these optics, but they're hollow. And I think that in and of itself should suggest to the black people considering voting for him that he is not a candidate for black people. He's the candidate for the people who are anti-black. You know, the people that are calling Juneteenth the ratchet N-word holiday are the pro-Trump. That's the pro-Trump group, right? And you know, I talk about politics quite a bit on this show. I can't make a stronger case for Joe Biden than he's not Trump, so I won't. But I will say that what Biden has done for black people is not nothing. You know, and you could make an argument Donald Trump let a few people out of prison, but Donald Trump, I mean, that's a very short list. He let some folks out of prison. Joe Biden has actively reclassified marijuana. You know, obviously you can't make it federally legal, but you can reclassify it. And that's something that's disproportionately affected black people. Of course, there's Juneteenth. There's a couple of things. It's not what we asked for, but there's a couple of things. The student loan relief that disproportionately affects black people. You know, he didn't get that through the way we wanted, but he got some of it through, and he's still working on the rest of it. Again, you know, and then you have these hollow performative campaign stops by Donald Trump. And I don't get the black men that are trying to vote for this guy, because I'm one of the ones that would never vote for him. He's just an awful human being. And because I'm not a journalist, I get to say that. So anyway, moving on. Last up, a Connecticut family is suing Legoland in New York for more than $1 million, claiming discrimination by the theme park and their characters during a 2022 visit to the park. In the lawsuit filed last week in New York State Supreme Court in Orange County, Stamford attorney Darnell Crossland contends that his client, Brianna Ramsey of Bridgeport, and a second plaintiff, Shaquana Johnson Williams of New York, experienced racial discrimination at the theme park when Legoland characters didn't fully interact with their children. The families were at the park together on June 4th, 2022, and noticed a dance party, according to the lawsuit. But when their children wanted to participate, they were ignored by the costume characters, Crossland said in the complaint. In a statement on Thursday, Legoland New York said they wanted all of their guests to be comfortable at their theme park. Quote, "We are committed to fostering an open, inclusive, and safe environment where all our guests feel valued. As this matter is currently under litigation, we are unable to provide further details and will respect the legal process," end quote. Crossland is asking for more than $1 million in compensatory, consequential, and punitive damages, as well as attorney's fees and costs. So you may remember this video. I certainly do. Talk to us a bit about the update. How does this hit you?
Actually, I'm glad that you said that, because, you know, of course, now we have an update, but I do remember distinctively when these videos were, beginning to go viral a while back. And I mean, anyone that just watches the videos without even diving into the lawsuit, I mean, it's out of the different stories that we've talked about, this one to me just like is really heartbreaking, because, you know, we're talking about little kids here. Yeah. Like, you know, they don't understand, and they're interacting. to them, they're just wanting to interact with these characters that they watch on screen. And I do think it's really interesting that the lawsuit, I think, is really starting to bring more national conversation to, practices on making sure that we don't have situations like this happen.
Yeah.
And I will say too, I'm glad that we already do have some type of response from the company, but I am disappointed that it's not a lot more. Because I know that right now they've even mentioned, so there's a 17-minute video that they're quote unquote investigating and looking into, but there hasn't really been any kind of follow up over what that looks like. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's just disappointing because it's one of those things that I think that the company is still walking that fine line that we've touched on with the last story about the airline, where I feel like these companies have this very fine line, and in many cases, I actually personally refer to it as character defining moments, whether as an individual or an organization, where you can either lean into it and you get to really define, your stance on being pro or against something, or you're just trying to manage the damage. And it's kind of hard to refute that right now they're just trying to assess what course of action is going to minimize the damage or stockholders, versus making a stance of, hey, you know what, we see what happened, we're listening to what you've shared with us, and we're going to take accountability and prevent this from happening again. And that's not what we've seen so far yet.
Correct. Exactly. And you know what, I remember there was another video that came out shortly after this, and I hope that you've seen it too, because it'll connect, and I hope that our listeners have seen it too. But right after this happened, it might have been in the following week or two, if I had to guess, there was another video that came out. And if I'm not mistaken, it was from Disneyland. And there might have been other videos in between. I would never profess to have the best memory. I consume a lot of online content. Okay. But I know that we were still reeling from this discrimination, perhaps some other discrimination at theme parks of characters refusing to engage with Black children. But it was, I want to say, the character Jessie from Toy Story, which makes me think it was Disneyland, because they don't share their characters all that much. And if I'm not mistaken, that's a Pixar Disney character. So Jessie from Toy Story was at Disneyland dancing and interacting with the crowd. And there might have been a little Black girl in the video that was coming up to Jessie, and Jessie almost was done interacting with that section of the crowd and was going to go to another section. And out of the corner of her eye, or his eye, I don't know who the individual was inside the costume, clocked this little girl wanting to dance. And I feel like that was a moment for all of us, because Jessie saw that. I'm guessing Jessie saw this video from Legoland, saw the Black girl, and was like, let me make sure that this girl remembers today, right? And she went and she danced with this little girl, and it was beautiful. She danced and danced and danced. And she didn't move on, and she was intentional, and she was going to make sure that that little girl felt loved and was centered. And it was just magical, it was special. And that's what we need. And if we had a response from Legoland that suggested, hey, we're going to make sure that Black children feel centered. That's it. Full stop. Bring on the rest of it. But no matter what, come hell or high water, Black children will be loved. If you walk into this park, that's what you're going to get. And I don't know how to legally put that language together, but I do know what intentionality looks like. And if we got something like that from them, might feel a little bit more comforting, as opposed to, okay, we got $1 million lawsuit here. We got to figure out how to navigate this. And, so here we respect the legal process and, that whole thing, which I know those are kind of standard. The thing is, I think what I'm trying to say is there might be intentionality behind this language. Might be. It remains to be seen. But I don't feel it, right? Some people are just orators. They're poetic. They're great writers, and some are not. And some people have lawyers craft the documents, and lawyers can be very dispassionate. And some people, like the CEO from earlier, are making the statements himself. like, hey, this is not who we are. This is not who I want us to be. We are going to listen to the leaders, the elders, the people that know better. We're going to follow, and we're going to be the example for folks that come behind us. That feels like intentionality. And again, from what Legoland put up, it feels like it came from a lawyer, which to me suggests, okay, we have to navigate this so that we can, as you mentioned, garner a return for our shareholders. So anyway, we'll keep watching. We'll see what happens when they all settle up. We'll be right here to report that as well. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank you as always for your insight, for your journalistic integrity, because again, I'm not a traditional, classically trained journalist. I'm a gentleman who is learning, I suppose, but really a person that has lived enough life as a Black man with enough insight to be able to offer some perspective here and there. But I think that you certainly bring the balance to the equation. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, today's guest has been Black Information Network news anchor Katie Gray. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I'm your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. And join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.